What up, y'all? It's your girl, Willow B, and welcome to another episode of the New Teacher Bootcamp Podcast, where I am your host. This is going to be a safe space for new and veteran teachers to learn from my mistakes as an educator. So let's get right into it. This episode is sponsored by yours truly, Willow B, the author of the children's book, When I Tell Them I'm From Petersburg. A children's book, of course, an autobiography of my life that talks about people's perception of me when I tell them I'm from Petersburg, Virginia. Get your copy today, link in the description below. Now, let's get down to business. Today we're going to talk about pacing guides and lesson plans. And if we have time, I'm going to go over the different types of learners because I think all three of those elements work hand in hand. When we're talking about the pacing guide, that's where we got to start. This is big picture, what you're supposed to accomplish quarterly. Some people call it, quarterly outlook or year at a glance, whatever term you prefer. But pacing guide helps you stay on track with what you're supposed to do within 9 weeks, within a semester, and by the end of the year. In the state of Virginia, we have the spring test called SOL test, which review or check for the children's mastery of that particular subject. With that said, every subject has an SOL. We call it the standard of learning. Every subject has one. Big or small, the SOLs cover just about everything you can think of for a subject. For mine in particular, when we enter the school year, we start out with simple stuff. On the health side, we talk about the health triangle as well as SMART goals. On the PE side, we start up with fitness testing. So using the fitness gram where we do pacer, curl up, push up, plank, that kind of thing. Or should I say trunk? We got rid of the plank. As well as soccer and flag football. We keep it kind of simple because it's transitioning into the year, right? With that said, when we think about pacing guide, it can get complicated when you get off pace, meaning the students didn't quite grasp whatever you were teaching in the moment. And now you have to keep going and leave those behind in a sense. The trick to this is don't get frustrated. Don't get overwhelmed. Some kids aren't going to get it. But the best way to help filter them back in without boring the kids who got it is to do a spiral review. For example, if we're doing single digit, I got tongue tied. If we're doing single digit addition, and we're transitioning to double digit addition, most kids grasp the concept of one number on top of each other. But when you add two numbers on top of each other, it becomes complicated because now we have to carry over what's left over. For most kids, it's complicated because it's like, well, what do I do with the rest of it? Because I can only get up to, let's say I'm doing 21 plus let's say 19. Let's say we're doing 21 plus 19. We know that we start on the right-hand side, draw little columns, right? Separating things. We do 1 plus 9 first is 10. Well, I can't put 10 at the bottom. So what do I have to do? I have to put the 0 there and then carry over my 1. For some kids, they forget how to carry over. They don't understand why we carry over. And it can get complicated, right? The reality is, even if they don't get it and don't do well on it, you can do what's called a spiral review where you retest it in smaller chunks. For example, when I was first learning multiplication, I didn't quite understand how skip counting was multiplying and how dividing was just multiplying in reverse until my teacher would do minute math. We would fill out the multiplication grid as quickly as possible. Over time, that rote memorization helped me realize these numbers are just relatable however you do it. 3 times 4 is 12. Well, then 12 divided by 4 is going to be 3. You can do the number forward and backward, but the outcome should still be the same. Initially, when learning that skill, it was hard to connect the dots. And a spiral review, just taking a couple minutes to go back and review with the kids, it does help. And it helps keep you on pace. In PE, I do a spiral review at the beginning of a lesson to just, check for understanding to see what they remember from the last lesson. If we're talking about SMART goals, I might ask, okay, last class we talked about SMART goals. Can anyone tell me what's SMART? What are the acronym for SMART? Someone might shout out specific and measurable and attainable or achievable, realistic and time-bound. Even if they don't get all of them, having different people shout out what they remember, I can connect the dots and say, okay, well, today we are going to do the pacer where we're going to put your SMART goal into play. The goal today is to complete 10 sprints. If you can do more, great, but that's the minimum I want you to complete. And from there, when we do it the next time, you can predict for yourself how many more you think you're going to do. Real simple. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated to stay on pace. But if your principals are checking in, especially if you're at a hard to staff school who's trying to maintain accreditation, this will be drilled into your head over and over again. You got to stay on pace. You got to stay on pace. And it does make teachers disgruntled, but I assure you, the spiral review is truly helpful when trying to stay on pace. The next thing we're going to talk about are lesson plans. Lesson plans are the many steps, like the little tiny steps that we take to achieve our pace and stay on pace, really. It's the blueprint of our lesson. It goes over your standards of learning, like what are you going to do that day. It can even be a behavioral, having a brain fart. It's basically behaviors, conditions, and criteria describing how the students are going to execute the lesson and how accurately they're going to do it. On your lesson plan, also, you want to make sure you have key terms. If we're talking about the fitness gram, I'm going to have terms like 20-meter pacer, curl up, push up, sit up, things like that. Oh, trunk lift. Those are the terms I'm going to have as my vocabulary. My anticipatory set, which is my hook, how I'm going to bring the kids into the lesson. I'm going to ask a question similar to who's ever ran the pacer before, who's ever done a sit up. Show of hands, who's ever done a sit-up or a curl-up or a push-up. And a lot of kids will raise their hand because they remember it from the year before. And you simply connect the dots and say, well, today we're going to do this element of the fitness gram, and you have free time at the end once we have finished. I can tell you now, it's difficult to do all parts of the fitness gram in one day. So I try to break it up into chunks. If I do pacer, which takes the longest, that last 10-minute span, they might have a little free time just to kind of unwind. But on different days, I might add trunk lift and shoulder mobility together because it's something easy to do and easy to measure. Ideally, within your lesson plan, not only are you describing vocabulary word and having your hook, but you're also talking about how you're going to do it. The best method I use, or most people use, or I've seen use, is what we call I do, we do, you do. I do is I show it to the kids first. This is what I'm looking for. When you do a push-up, I need your body and shoulders to be in a line from your shoulders to your toes or to your heels. And then I say, all right, guys, this is what it looks like. I demonstrate. And then I say, all right, well, let's do it together so I can make sure you can do it. And then I go through and I correct their form. And right before the test, I ask, are there any questions about how to do a push-up? Okay, remember, you're going to do the push-up to a cadence. Make sure you bring your chest all the way down to those elbows or about a 90-degree angle. With the I do, we do, you do method, it helps the kids see it, try it for themselves before actually executing the skill. It's important to remember that they're not always going to get it right, but you want to see how close to accurate they get. And this is where we do kind of our grading system with the lesson plan. I try to include that too. I do 2, 3, 4. 4, I can do my push-up perfect and help somebody. 3, I can only save me. I got 1 push-up in me. 2, I could work a little bit harder on. I'm still struggling on some of, getting down and back up. That helps me as a teacher say, okay, I might have to incorporate more upper body exercises and core exercises. That way, by the next time we do the fitness test, they're ready. Ideally, with the lesson plan, you want to have some type of wrap up. I do an exit ticket and ask the kids, well, how did you feel about it? How did you feel about the pacer or feel about the lesson? It's a little bit more difficult to do this on the middle school and high school level because we have to make sure we have enough time to get changed, which is why I mentioned before that spiral review. Because the next time I see the kids, I might ask them, what did we do last class? Can anyone tell me what component of the fitness gram we completed last time? And that's truly a help for them because it keeps jogging their memory, connecting those dots. That way, when we transition to the health room, we talk about a SMART goal, they can say, oh, well, I completed such and such. I'm thinking I could probably do 2 more next time or 3 more next time. It really also helps boost their confidence. So those are the 2 pieces as far as lesson planning and pacing guide. At the very end, I forgot to say, at the very end of your lesson plan, make sure you put a reflection piece on there because no lesson is going to be perfect, but you do want to allow yourself time to reflect on what you can improve for the next one. Okay? Moving right along. So what does all of this mean? This means that you as a teacher are going to have to teach your content to different types of learners. This is where it gets tricky, so pay attention. We have 5 kinds of learners. Traditionally 4, but I'm going to say 5 because I found a new one after COVID. The first one is auditory. It's exactly what it sounds like. Auditory, which means they learn better by listening. When you're giving instruction, make sure you're clear with the words that you say. And if you have to rephrase it, that is fine. But an auditory learner will execute the skill just by listening. Okay? A visual learner has to see it. Vision, visual. I gotta see it. With the I do, you do, we do, or we do, you do method, I'm demonstrating what I'm looking for the kids. I need them to see it, right? Most kids can duplicate what they see, but they got to see it first. In regards to my readers and writers, it's difficult for them to apply reading and writing in the gym, but they can do it in the classroom. Reading and writing looks like taking notes, maybe even making little diagrams to help them remember what the lesson was about. I know we don't take a lot of pencil and paper notes, but for those who need it, it's helpful to remember that the readers and writers have to read it or write it for themselves. The kinesthetic, this is number 4, the kinesthetic learners have to physically do it. This is something a little difficult to implement if you don't know what you actually want from your student. For example, if I say we're running a pacer and we're going to go from this line to that line, they heard this line, that line, but I also need to mark it with cones and allow them to walk it through from one spot to the next. And that simply looks like we're going to start on this baseline. It's a sprint and freeze. We're going to jog down to the opposite free throw line and stop and get even with the orange cone. This allows the students to not just hear what I'm saying and see what I'm saying, but physically do what I'm saying. Now, that last group of learners, I like to call the questioners. This is that group that spawned from COVID. Let's be honest, COVID ruined everything around us. And with this particular group of students, they're going to question everything because a lot of stuff made them insecure about their ability to be successful. It's not their fault. No one could have predicted COVID. But with our questioners, you want to give them room to ask questions. The only problem we're going to have with this is the questioners are also going to want you to do the task for them in the classroom. In the gym, they're going to want you to walk them through it again with all the pieces, from you demonstrating to them trying it into everybody doing it together. They're going to want you to walk them through it. The questioners are the ones who can wear you out a little bit because they have the ability to do it. Whatever you're putting in front of them, they just second guess themselves. With that said, I want to connect the dots for you. We talked about pace and guide. We talked about lesson plan. And we talked about the types of learners. But what does that mean to a new teacher? It simply means that when you're teaching, regardless of your content, you want to make sure you provide something for each one of the learners. I'll keep using math because it's one of my favorites, but they're parallels in every subject. For example, I talked about counting. They have little counters you can use for our kinesthetic learners, and videos we can watch for my visual and auditory learners. And we can even do worksheets for our readers and writers who need to physically sit and write it down. You know, you want to provide elements for each type of learner, even if it isn't something big, it could be something small. You could say, if 2 + 2 is 5, stand up. If it's not, sit down. Now they're thinking on their feet, literally thinking on their feet. Ideally, all of this is overwhelming because it's like, man, I got this treasure map, or I got this pacing guide that my principals expect me to execute. I've never written a lesson plan, or the lesson plan I've written doesn't match the one they're expecting me to write. Then I'm being drilled on the BCC's behaviors, conditions, and criteria because I don't even know what that is. And now you're telling me I have to add a piece for each type of learner to make sure that it's being executed appropriately? Stop for a second. Take a deep breath. everything that I've mentioned in this podcast today, focus on a singular aspect of teaching. Understanding your types of learners helps you to reflect on how to better execute the lesson plan. And when you can better execute the lesson plan, it helps you to stay on pace with what you should accomplish by the end of the quarter, and by the end of the semester, and by the end of the year. It's just a lot of words, but I assure you, you can do this. It's not impossible. Before I close out, because this was a shorter message today, but before I close out, I just want to share one thing with you. I got a text message this week from the young lady that braids my hair. She also played basketball. Like, I was her biggest champion because I felt like she had so much potential to do great things in anything she put her hands to, honestly. Well, she texted me this week. This girl got her a job working at a high school as a PE teacher. Couldn't be more proud of her. And she said to me, the podcasts are really helping. And that's all I needed to hear to keep me going. Because, sometimes life gets the best of us and we get a little worn out. I ain't gonna lie. Teacher work week was a little tiresome this week. But I do this because, as I said from before, iron sharpens iron. And I just want someone to be able to learn from my mistakes. Besides, two brains are better than one. And I learn best when I'm learning from other people. So, shout out to Des. Proud of you, girl. Keep doing what you're doing. I know you're going to do great things. And to anyone else listening to this podcast, be encouraged. The first year is the toughest, but like my mama said, once you get through it, that first year, even the second year and the third year, and however many years you plan to stay in education, it gets easier over time. Once you get your procedures and protocols down and your routine, piece of cake, piece of pie. So before we close out, I just want to recap today's podcast. Sorry, brain fart. I want to recap today's podcast. When it comes to pacing, guys, remember, this is our year to glance, our quarterly outlook, what we should be accomplishing by the end of the 9 weeks, by the end of the semester, and by the end of the year. Number 2, lesson plans. Lesson plans are our blueprint on how we're going to teach. Don't expect your principals to understand everything you put in your lesson plan, but keep your lesson plan simple. Always outline what your unit is, your standards of learning, what the expectation is for the kid. So the students will demonstrate how to be respectful and behave appropriately in PE while learning how to play soccer. Sometimes we put a percentage at the end of that, but again, that's a message for another time. Within your lesson plan, just keep it simple. I do, we do, you do. Break it down into chunks. Make sure you also addressing each kind of learner. And it doesn't have to be spelled out in your lesson plan, but do your best to make sure it's including every type of learner, because we have those kids who feel left out in general, and we don't want them to feel that way in our classrooms. All right, y'all. I'm out. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.